Hello, and welcome to Childless Not by Choice. This podcast was created for and about the Childless Not by Choice community on a global level. Before we get started, I would like to thank my sponsors and supporters. Thank you, Morgan Air Conditioning, Sales, Service, and Installation, serving Tampa, Florida, and the surrounding areas. Morgan Air Conditioning can be reached by calling 813-500-7765. That's 813-500-7765. Or their web address is www.morganair.net. That's www.morganair.net. Along with a stellar business reputation in the Tampa, Florida area, Morgan Air Conditioning is also known and well received for giving back to the community, whether it is back to school drives or donating services to the less fortunate. Thank you, Morgan Air Conditioning, for recognizing the vision of Childless Not by Choice and being a part of it. Next, I would like to thank Alba Digital Media for creating my website, www.childlessnotbychoice.net. That's www.childlessnotbychoice.net, and for producing this podcast. Alba Digital Media's clients include those who need website building and maintenance, as well as those like myself who require professional podcast editing. Their client base reflects many industries and levels of needs for professional assistance. To contact Alba Digital Media for your web building and podcast production needs, visit www.albadigitalmedia.com. That's www.albadigitalmedia.com. Thank you, Alba Digital Media, for making me look good and sound good. Finally, I would like to thank Devoted, the musical duo who created my theme music. Thank you, Devoted, for your beautiful music. Devoted has had the opportunity to sing and play in many countries. To contact Devoted for your music needs, visit devotedministries@gmail.com. That's devotedministries@gmail.com. And if you would like to become a one-time or ongoing sponsor, or if you would like to become a patron of Childless Not by Choice, please contact me at Civilla@CivillaMorgan.com. That's Civilla@CivillaMorgan.com for details. Now, on to the show. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to Childless Not by Choice, where my mission is to recognize and speak to the broken hearts of childless not by choice women and men around the world. Civilla Morgan here. I'm spreading the great news that we can live a joyful, relevant, and fulfilled life, although we did not have the children we so wanted. Before we continue on here, I'd like to thank my Patreon contributor. Patreon contributors are those who have taken an interest in my platform, whether they fit the Childless Not by Choice demographic or not. They have decided to contribute a certain dollar amount on a regular basis to help fund my dream of creating awareness and conversation for the Childless Not by Choice community globally. Click the Patreon link in the show notes for details and to become a patron. And I'd like to thank Jordan Morgan for his monthly patronage. Thank you, Mr. Jordan Morgan. Your monthly contributions are just greatly used and appreciated in the community. Thank you so much. Just a reminder, everybody, visit the website where you can join the community group, check out all the podcast episodes, the blogs, the resources. Just go to www.childlessnotbychoice.net. The website is where the conversation is happening. Well, we have a special guest today. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest, and then we will get started in conversation here. Jody Day, founder of Gateway Women, is author of the best-selling book, Living the Life Unexpected, 12 Weeks to Your Plan B for a Meaningful and Fulfilled Future, or Fulfilling Future Without Children. And she is also the best-selling author, and she'll correct me if I'm wrong in just a second, but she's also the author of Rocking the Life Unexpected. But I think she just basically updated the book to what is now called Living the Life Unexpected. Either way, it's an awesome book, and I would just really suggest that you pick up the copy, whether you're childless not by choice or not. I think it's an awesome book for everybody to read to get a better handle on what it's like to live the life of a childless not by choice woman, anywhere in the world, by the way. Her TEDx talk, The Lost Tribe of Childless Women, was given at TEDxHull in March 2017 and has had more than 27,000 views. Jody was honored in BBC's 100 Women in 2013, and she is a trainee psychotherapist and a former fellow in social innovation at Cambridge Judge Business School, Cambridge University. She runs workshops, online courses, a global online community, and global social events for women coming to terms with a life that does not include motherhood. And she's currently training other women to lead her workshops in the UK, Ireland, Europe, the USA, and Canada. She plans to expand those trainings to train women in Australia and New Zealand in the near future. Gateway Woman has an aggregated social reach of over 2 million between the website, various social media platforms, and its global public and private communities. Jody says that she was partnered and or married for 16 years in her 20s and 30s, during which she experienced unexplained infertility after an abortion in her very early 20s. She was single for many years before finally meeting her Mr. Right, and they divide their time between Ireland and Ibiza. I never know if I'm saying Ibiza right, but I think I am. Anyway, welcome to the show, Jody. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, welcome. Thank you so much for that lovely welcome, Civilla. And you were absolutely right about my book. It's Living the Life Unexpected is the reissue and update of my original self-published Rocking the Life Unexpected.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. And I'm going to start out by going way back. Well, if 2012 is way back. I read your article, I May Not Be a Mother, But I'm Still a Person, written in the Guardian newspaper back in February of 2012. And as I read the article, I could feel my heart breaking for the way you were treated at that party. I don't know if you remember that.
I will never forget that party, actually. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So I was thinking, I know the article was written so long ago and it is not healthy to dwell on things, but I just wonder what comes to mind when or if you think back, and you say you do remember, but what comes to mind when you think back to those times and events?
I think I look back with great sadness for how hard it was to be me during that time, and how hard it was to be understood, by my friends, by my family, by complete strangers. And also, that article, when it was published, kind of lost me a few friends as well. Oh, wow. So it was interesting that in sort of really, I didn't criticize anyone in that article, but it was interesting how in writing about how misunderstood I felt, some people, instead of seeing that as an opportunity for empathy, actually kind of, cut me out of their life. So it was really interesting how difficult it is to be honest about some of the impacts of childlessness. And it's one of the reasons why many of us say nothing and suffer in silence.
So true. And I think it seems to me that the people who left their relationship with you, I think they did it out of fear. They didn't want to face what they were feeling or face how you were feeling. So, yeah, that's pretty sad. And but dare I say, you are still here. There's a great expression, which I do believe is American, which says sometimes you have to weed your friendship garden.
Oh, yes. And certainly that period of my childless grieving was very marked by massive shifts in my relationships and my friendships. And although that was incredibly hard. And that sort of 2-year period where that was happening was kind of probably the loneliest of my adult life, because I also stopped putting a lot of effort into relationships where I had been the one kind of doing the CPR for a long time.
Oh, wow.
I stopped. I stopped. I thought, I wonder what would happen if I stopped making all this effort. And I'm sure you and many of your listeners will know that quite often that what happens is that nothing happens. We just kind of drift off the radar. But, during that time, that space that opened up in my life that was full of grief and loneliness, it was also really when I was coming to terms with my situation, accepting that the old life that I'd imagined was never going to be. It was a massive grieving process, not just for children, but for the life I was going to have, the person I was going to be, the people I thought who would be around me in that life. And a few friends, absolutely came through for me during that time. And some of them, were and are parents. So it's not necessarily that I could only be understood by childless women. But I think we live in very grief-phobic societies, both the UK and the US. And I think you're right. I think my grief and my willingness to be open about my pain was not something very, very many people were comfortable with.
Right. And so the way they reacted was just to leave. And we don't
or just
quite
to
have
kind
that.
of ghost. To ghost,
Right.
I think, is now the expression from the dating world. Just to kind of let things slide. I mean, it wasn't. There were a couple of uncomfortable conversations, but mostly it was just a kind of deafening silence.
Wow. Well, that's the same as leaving to me, and
Yep.
and that I think what we say here is, I'm reading a book right now by a very prolific pastor here in the U.S., and the title of his book is called Let It Go. And sometimes we just have to let people go. We do try to hang on because who wants to be lonely? Nobody wants to be lonely. Most people don't, unless they just want to be a hermit. And hey, I guess, whatever floats your boat. But most of us want to have relationships. And I remember seeing that in your book about the not just the children we thought we would have, but the actual family unit we thought we would be.
Yeah.
And that's the difficult part. But yeah, as we continue on, I'll talk more about the book because I gotta let you guys know I absolutely loved the book. And there were so many women on my platform who are reading it and telling me how much they loved it. And I'm like, okay, let me see what this book is all about and this lady named Jody Day. So it's an awesome book. Very, very well put together and just very well written. Loved it. So
Thank you.
Switching off a little bit, why did you call the platform Gateway Women?
Do you know, it's a really interesting thing because I love words, and in a sort of previous life, I worked in sort of branding and marketing. And so I was always thinking up names for things. And people would often ask me to help them with names for new companies and stuff like that. But that's not how this happened. It was literally a kind of download. I was just like, well, what am I going to call this thing? And it was like, it's the Gateway Project. That was the first thing. It was, okay. So that was my first thing, Gateway Project. And then I thought, no, it's going to be about women. It's going to be Gateway Women. And it was literally, it came to me. I mean, I didn't think about it. It came to me like that. And then later I started to thought, well, what is this? And also quite a few people, particularly those close to me, of course, because they were the only ones who knew anything about this at first, told me it was a terrible name. Because there was at the time, there was a chain of supermarkets in Ireland called Gateway. And there was also quite a big computer company called Gateway. Both of those seem to have disappeared off the map. And
yes.
And I said, no, I like it. And also it doesn't have my name in it, which felt really important. And not for kind of privacy reasons, but I just didn't really want it to be about me. I wanted it to be about us. And then when I thought about it later, because I would be asked, why Gateway Women, I started to think, why did that come to me? And I have the image of a gate in my mind, of a threshold. And I kind of thought, of course, because, for example, all my life when I've taken photographs, I've often taken photographs of gates and doorways. When I've been traveling in the Far East, I've been inside dark temples and I've taken pictures of kind of lovely temples looking at walls, looking out into the daylight. So big squares of light. I've always been drawn to thresholds, and both, figuratively, but also emotionally. In my work as, training to be a psychotherapist, it's about these moments in life, these liminal experiences when we're moving from one state to another: birth, adolescence, becoming a mother, not becoming a mother, menopause, aging, death, the big stuff that nobody wants to talk about, when we're basically in transition from one way of being human to the next. This is where the juice is. This is where the art is. This is where, we meet our humanity at its rawest and at its most beautiful, is during these times. And that's what I love. And then I thought about it as well. And the image of a gate, you can either see a gate as something like going into a field, as something which stands in your way. It's blocking you from entering a pasture, or it is the gate that opens and leads you into the next place. So it is very much about where you are and where you want to be. So it's about thresholds. So it was really interesting because my unconscious mind worked out everything I've just said in the last couple of minutes without me having any access to it, and just went, gateway.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Yeah, I've always wanted to know that. Well, now the listeners, especially the ones who haven't read the book yet, or maybe not quite as familiar with your platform now, get it. And it definitely makes sense. It just, as you were explaining it, it made me think of something my dad said many, many, many years ago. He said that we change, our bodies, everything about us changes every 7 years. And I never took time to research it, but maybe. Well,
Gateway Women is 7 years old.
Oh,
it was 7 years old in April. So, and I definitely feel that it is in the process of transformation itself as well.
Wow. Okay.
Because I am, and it is. So it's an interesting time. Yeah.
Well, happy 7-year anniversary.
Thank you.
And best wishes for many, many more. Yeah. So, I was reading this quote recently, and it says, "When our broken dreams have cost us so dear, dreaming a new dream takes great courage." And it was attributed to Gateway Women. And so I was wondering if that was indeed your quote.
It is indeed.
Okay. And how do you grasp the courage to dream a new dream? If you can tell us how you do that.
Well, it may not be that great to say it, but most human beings don't change until they absolutely have to. I think until the pain of not changing is so great that the pain of changing becomes tolerable, because human beings, we hate change. Right. Our egos are set up to prevent it because, change equals risk. So I think the courage to create change comes from, courage comes from the Latin word for heart. I think it gets to a point where our hearts cannot bear it any longer. If change were easy, there would not be thousands and thousands and thousands of books about it. And I think one of the reasons that change is so hard, and this is totally missing from most sort of mainstream understanding, is that in order to change, you have to grieve what you're letting go of. You cannot move into the new without letting go of the old, and that involves grief. And we hate grief as well. So it's,
definitely,
so change, I think, it comes from the heart, and it's rarely genuinely voluntary. Usually it's just like, I just have to do this, or I can't bear it any longer. And that's how it was for me. And if you can have the support of others who are going through that change at the same time, that makes so much difference. That's what the therapeutic profession is about, is someone to be, your companion, whilst you go through the terrifying experience of change.
As you say in the book, grief is not a monologue, it's a dialogue.
Absolutely.
So that makes absolute sense.
Mm.
As I was reading through your intro in Living the Life Unexpected, I stopped short at the section where you considered doing kind of a switch off from the last question, but considered doing volunteer work in Kabul.
Yeah.
And then you reconsidered because you did not think you could deal with the Kabul winter.
Mm-hmm.
And you weren't even considering the fact that Kabul was in the middle of a war.
Nope.
And that you could become a casualty. And so I was thinking, as I read that, I said, wow, I'm sure other childless women can as well, definitely understand the level of grief where we do not even consider our safety. And I guess that kind of does tie in with the previous question, because if we had somebody that we could dialogue with, then we would consider our safety. So, at any
it was
rate,
also
how do you?
that I felt I had no value. I didn't value myself. I didn't value my own life. I felt I had nothing to contribute to the world. So really, what did it matter if I got blown up? Who was going to miss me?
Who's going to miss me? That's exactly. I've been there. Who's going to miss me anyway? It's not like I've made a contribution to this world in any way. I mean, good grief. In my case, I couldn't even find somebody who would be willing to marry me, never mind have children. So, and we'll talk about the double whammy in just a moment. But, that was the question. And there are people who just don't get it. Again, many years ago, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, I had a conversation with my brother, and he was absolutely shocked when I told him that I just felt like filler. And he said, filler? I said, yeah, the stuff that you fill packages with, like the peanuts to keep the package from breaking. He said, why would you say such a thing? I said, well, I mean, that's what my life amounts to. It's not like I'm getting anything else done. I'm just here to be a filler. Wow. And he told me never to say that again, that I'm more than filler. But I totally understand, that so what if I got blown up I've been there. So how do you get people
I think I think it's really important to talk about that, because we don't talk about those aspects of grief. I mean, right. I went through a period, which was also during that very lonely period we were talking about, of feeling like a complete waste of space as a human being. I felt that I was kind of even using up oxygen that someone else could make better use of.
Someone with children.
Yeah. And I didn't actively want to commit suicide, but the idea that I might not wake up again was really attractive. And, sometimes people would say to me, oh, but you have your freedom, like this. And I would think, you have no idea. This does not feel like freedom. I remember what freedom felt like when I was 20, and it felt like opportunity and possibility and choices. This feels like a dark lake stretching between me and death, of kind of infinite width and infinite depth. And I have no idea how to cross it at all. My life felt like a life sentence of imprisonment, of something to carry every day. And I had no idea how I was going to find the strength to carry it. It's like freedom, goodness, the depths of grief and sorrow and the courage it takes to kind of keep on going when you feel like that. It is something I will never forget.
And that is what we're trying to get women who have children or have a family to understand. And, how do you get people outside of our demographic to understand this level of grief, or do you even bother?
It's a huge task, Civilla, because it involves really asking people to contact that part of themselves or where they feel the most loss. That's the only way you can really contact it, because that's what empathy is. Empathy is feeling those feelings within ourselves that someone else is feeling. What really helped me was one of my dearest friends, one of those friends I was talking about that was there for me, is the mother of my eldest godson. And he's in his early 20s now. And when I was first writing my blogs for Gateway Women, one day she said to me, I'm reading your blogs And, I just feel terrible that, you feel this bad. And I was trying to imagine how it feels to be you. And she said, and the only way I can really get a handle on what you must be feeling is to imagine my son dying. Mm-hmm. And it was such a helpful thing to say, because I realized that in order for her to contact my grief, she had to imagine the very thing that she spends all her time trying not to think about, which is, I understand that, when you are a parent, you're permanently aware when your children are out of your sight, mm-hmm. That something could happen to them. So you learn as a parent to kind of block that, or you'd never let them out of your sight.
Right.
And I thought, well, it requires the level of kind of empathic gymnastics that, and this, my friend is exceptional. She's exceptionally empathic. And it just made me a lot more understanding of why a lot of parents can't go there. And then on top of that, you lay the fact that we don't like to think in society about unfixable things. We live in an extraordinary moment in human history in terms of medicine, in terms of so many things, in terms of science, when it's like anything can be fixed. You throw enough money, enough data, enough science, enough time, enough effort, everything can be sorted. And actually, childlessness really reminds us of our limits as human beings, and that actually not everything can be fixed. And what that leads us on to on an unconscious level is that actually we're mortal. We're going to die. Mm-hmm. So it's like our situation touches the most profound vulnerabilities of what it means to be human. I mean, we are just so unpopular what we bring up.
Right. That's why people want to look the other way. It's more comfortable to look the other way.
Yeah.
And ask us why we don't just get over it, because they don't want to deal with it.
Well, neither do we. And I have to say, if there were a way to get over it, I would have done it,
Exactly. We all would. We all would. But you don't get over grief. And I guess that's what we have to continue to explain is that grief and childlessness are linked. And we're trying to manage it and deal with it. Stop looking the other way, because we're not going away if you look the other way.
And also, grief is an equal opportunities visitor. We will all lose what we love. Mm-hmm. It's that's part of what it is to love, to be human. So I was talking to one of the women that I've trained to lead the weekend, and I was talking to her last night about grief and about loss. And I said, if the work that we're doing, with childlessness, with, in a way, grief education, I said, I think if everyone in our society were able to be comfortable with grief and to learn how to kind of experience grief in themselves and work with it, I said, I think it would change. I think it would change the world. Mm-hmm. Because I think a lot of our problems as a society is that we're running away from difficult feelings into addictions, into drugs, into distractions, because sometimes just the experience of being human, of being vulnerable, is just so uncomfortable.
That's so true. And, I'm sitting here and I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, I think all of us who are running Childless Not by Choice platforms are, we're even in a group that's even, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but we're having to manage our own grief, because as far as I'm concerned, grief doesn't completely go away. It's just something we learn to manage, and it comes and goes, it comes in waves, and yet we have the strength to turn around and help other women get to a certain point where they can deal with the grief. And even as you were talking, although she's not in our demographic, I was just thinking about Kate Spade and just how people don't understand that grieving the childlessness can take us to such a place.
Yeah.
We don't know what her reasons were. And as I said in my post yesterday, and my condolences to her family and friends, but and you mentioned it earlier, the thoughts of suicide, although you don't actually think of ways to do it. It's not something that hasn't crossed your mind because, you don't feel like you would be missed because you didn't make a contribution because you didn't have a child or a family.
Yeah.
And people,
and yet our family, like your brother, would be so shocked to think that we think ourselves to be of so little importance when there are people around us in some shape or form who would be devastated by our loss.
They would, and I know they would, but still, that's what I'm saying. It's such a thing that we're managing inside of our heads. It's such a battle going on inside of us that I just wish more people understood that. But it's
interesting what you were saying about, grief not ending. It's interesting because I'm not grieving now. I'm really, really through. I feel as at peace with my childlessness, I think, as if I'd chosen it, which is quite extraordinary. I didn't know it would ever be possible to get to that point. But it can still get spiked, and it's never something I anticipate. You
don't see it coming.
No, I mean, a friend has a baby and I'm fine, but something completely random that I'm not expecting just kind of touches me. Except these days, instead of it feeling like, a horse kicking my heart, now it feels more like a cocktail stick to the heart. It's sharp. And I recover much more quickly. And it's like, oh gosh, there's that grief. Wow, where did that come from? Okay, it's about this. And it's an aspect of my loss that I hadn't considered before. And I think, I don't get that either. Right, okay. But I am thinking, well, when my friends are going to start having grandchildren, I'll be 54 soon. It's probably going to start happening soon. If I'd had children, my children would be in their late 20s by now. Some of my friends have got kids in their late 20s, early 30s. It's going to start happening soon.
Yeah, my oldest nephew just got married last month, and I'm still in a little bit of shock. I honestly am. I have 3 nephews. The youngest one is 22. The oldest one is 28. He has a birthday next month, so maybe 29. He got married, and all I could think about when I see this young man is this little 4-year-old coming into my bedroom when he came for visits with his toy telephone and making his business calls. That's all I can remember, and I'm like, when did this happen? He's actually a married man now. And so it's just amazing that, yes, he could have a child within the next year or so. And that would make me a great aunt. OMG. Can't believe it.
I'm quite looking forward to that. I don't have any brothers and sisters, so my nephews and nieces all come through my ex-husband, who came from a big family himself. So I have 10 nephews and nieces, not by blood, but they don't care. I don't care.
Right. That's wonderful.
I was there from day one. I'm sure, I'm sure one of them will get married soon and have children. It's, I hope, if that's what they want. I have a lot of girls, goddaughters and nieces who have seen and learnt from me that it's not a when, it's an if.
Yeah. Right.
And I wish that was more understood. My friend and colleague Jessica Hepburn, who started Fertility Fest, she's involved in a huge program in the UK to get fertility education into schools, which is so important for young men as well as young women, so that it's not just about how not to get pregnant. It's also about, more understanding of fertility, of the fertility window for both men and women, and also, that you can have a fulfilling life without children. Also the child-free choice, which is something that, young people don't know about often.
That's awesome. That would be wonderful, a wonderful addition to getting people globally to understand the whole dynamic.
Well, I didn't understand my fertility. I didn't understand it. I didn't even know my eggs aged.
Yeah, I
had
didn't either.
No idea. No.
They don't teach you those things.
No, it was just all about not getting pregnant. I mean, I was scared even to sit on a warm chair that a boy had recently been on, you know?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, we have a long way to go on the education level of the children, and I just hope we get there soon, you know. But you know, just switching gears a little bit again, I've been questioned about how I am childless not by choice because I did not meet Mr. Right. And so it wasn't necessarily an infertility issue. It was a social issue, no Mr. Right, and a biological issue, fibroids, because I did have fibroids. And those two equal no children. Yeah. And so I read your list of 50 ways to be childless, not by choice. And my reason was number 1. Yeah. So I got a little chuckle, as it always amazes me how people can see you but not see you. And I just wonder if you ever get tired of telling your story or explaining childlessness, or does it make a difference who the audience is? Whether or not you get tired of it.
Absolutely, totally. And quite frankly, not every moment is a teaching moment. Sometimes, you know, I mean, sometimes if I'm, you know, because I'm in a new relationship, you know, we've been together nearly a couple of years now. I've moved country, you know, so it's like I've met a lot of new people in the last couple of years. And so the opportunity for it to come up in a social situation is there again, because, you know, when I was single and childless for a long period of time, and you'll understand this, Civilla. I mean, there were years that went by when the only invitations I would get would be to a dental checkup. So, you know, so outside, you know, Gateway Women, I wasn't really talking to a lot of people. And, you know, sometimes when someone says something, you know, one of the classic bingos, you know, why don't you have kids, or have you thought of adoption, or, you know, whatever it might be, I sometimes will think to myself, okay, so you know what you just said to me, I'm able to talk to you about this now, and I'm able to explain, you know, why I don't have children. But if you'd asked me that question 5 years ago, probably I would have had to have changed the subject and left, and I would have had to sit in my car and cry and go home early. And this is why. And if it's someone I feel that I can help them to understand, so that the next time they meet someone like me who is grieving and who can't in that moment, you know, educate them, and who feels cornered, you know, I will do it. But there are other times, Civilla, when I just can't be bothered, because there are people sometimes, and you get the feeling that they are just committed to misunderstanding you.
Oh, yeah.
And I just think, you know what? I don't have the energy for this right now. I'd rather save my energy for a conversation where I feel it might be useful. Right. And I am a little bit bored of talking about my story, because I think that's a really good sign. Because I think when I was grieving, I wanted to talk about it all the time, because that's part of the grieving process, is that we want to talk about it over and over again. It's part of the process. So now it's like the fact that I'm a bit bored with it is great. You know, I'm enjoying that boredom.
Yes. And I definitely agree with you that you can sense when people just want to misunderstand, or maybe show you up or call you out, because they know the story, but they just feel like, I don't know, they want to be petty. And there are petty people out there. So, I definitely understand that. You say in chapter 3 that life can be tough, motherhood can be tough. And I've talked about this recently as well. Well, it was Mother's Day for us late last month. And I talked about the fact that I believe that motherhood is the toughest job on the planet, because if mothers aren't raising their children correctly, we can have mayhem. We're close to mayhem now, and mothers are raising their children. You know, I think most mothers are doing the best they can with their children. But I still also want people to understand that childlessness can be tough. And you say that as well. And you say that life can be tough. So how do we get the motherhood camp and the child? I hate to split us into camps, because I want us to be able to get to a point where we understand each other. But how do you get the motherhood camp and the childless camp to understand that life is tough no matter which camp we belong to? That childlessness is not a free ride. And you kind of touched on it earlier. Yeah.
It's really difficult, because it all boils down to pronatalism. And pronatalism is the ideology that underpins our attitudes to motherhood and our attitudes to childlessness. And it's the ideology that says that, becoming a parent is the only way to be a fully adult member of society, and that people who are parents are more important than people who are not parents. And particularly, as women are, seen as the lesser sex and are devalued by sexism amongst women, being a mother you have much more value as a woman than if you're not a mother. So we are taking on a really, really fundamental tenet of our culture and our society and our conditioning to try and talk about this. And we have seen the most massive, explosion in my lifetime of kind of what I call motherhood mania. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was born in 1964, so my kind of growing up years as a young person were the 1970s. And then my sort of teenage years were, the very early 1980s. So for me, I grew up in a time when there was nothing fashionable about pregnancy. There was nothing fashionable about motherhood. It was something a little bit of embarrassing that women's bodies do. They did it in private. They wore these enormous pregnancy dresses. And, it was really there was nothing cool about pregnancy. And if your favorite sort of movie star or pop star got pregnant, kind of her career was over. It was really like, oh God, she's a mum now. Mm-hmm. Debbie Harry never got pregnant, but the ones that did sort of disappeared out of, they became uncool. So we move forward. And then I'm thinking actually about 1981. Princess Diana, she was then, married Prince Charles, and then she was pregnant and she wore this huge maternity smock. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We fast forward a generation to when Beyonce was pregnant. And do you remember that photograph of her as a kind of African goddess that nearly broke the internet of this huge, beautiful pregnancy belly? It was kind of quite extra. I thought in one generation, it's gone from something private, slightly shameful, sexual. It's like they've had sex, it's like that's private, to, 10 million people looking at a photograph of a famous person pregnant. So we are living in an extraordinarily powerful pronatalist moment. And I do believe that is because I don't think it's a coincidence that has come after 50 years of the movement for the female liberation, for sort of gender equality. I think it's like a big sort of counterbalancing that's happening within the culture, because we've never seen so much change in the role of women in one lifetime. I mean, our lifetime, Civilla, it has never changed this much before. I mean, I would say that, when we had the transition from the matrilineal to the patriarchal culture, which was about 10,000 years ago, didn't happen in a generation. But in one generation, in our lifetime, we've had the introduction of the pill and birth control, legalized abortion. We've had fertility treatments, women's access to jobs and education, all in one generation. Everything has changed. And I think this glorification of motherhood is kind of a kickback against that. It's like, it's not that it's patriarchy isn't a group of men sitting in a room saying, women get back into the kitchen and get pregnant again. It's almost like there's a rebalancing of the status quo. And I think to be childless at this time is obviously the best time ever as a Western woman to be childless. But, there's never been a better time than this. It's still a tough experience, but it's the best it's ever been. But it's also one of the hardest times, I think, in terms of public, the way motherhood is overvalued publicly is so blatant right now.
I agree, especially with the amount of time it's taken, a generation, as you said, to change from when women hid when they became pregnant, because it was an embarrassing thing to be seen as pregnant. And now with the Beyonce, photograph, I just wonder if things will continue to move that quickly. And yes, we do live in the West, in the Western world, so we don't have to deal with, we deal with pettiness from time to time. But just before we started our interview, I was online and I have Google set up to get notifications whenever a news story is posted about childlessness globally. And I just pulled a story and saved it. Actually, I think I posted it on Facebook too, of a place in, is it Kenya? There's a place in Kenya where women, if they don't have children or they have children, one woman in the story had 5 girls, but that wasn't enough. Yeah. She wanted a boy child. And so because she didn't have a boy child, she married a couple. So that's what they do there. These single women marry couples and the 3 of them live together. And so the couple's children become hers so that she is not scorned in that society. So thankfully, we don't have to do that to survive. I'm like, oh my gosh. But at the same time, I still feel like there is so much work to do. And I don't know when that change is going to switch for the rest of the world, because I know, like you and many of us on this platform running Childless Not by Choice platforms, I think we're thinking globally. Totally. We're thinking that this has to change globally because women are at risk around the planet when this is the thought process and this is the way to get around not having children or not having the right sex of child. It was just unbelievable as I read the story. It's not the first story like that I've read, but to see it just coming out again, it's just like, when does this end? But, you know, just moving on here. And I think you touched on this with your previous answer. In chapter 3, you say ideology is that which everyone believes to be true, but it's actually a mixture of accepted prevalent beliefs that serve to support the dominant power group. And you say that up until 500 years ago, everyone thought the world was flat. That was an idea, not a truth. And around it was created a powerful ideology of Western Europe being the center of the world. We always think we're the center of the world. So perhaps the quote unquote belief that a woman can only have a meaningful life if she is a mother may prove to be an ideological one and not the purely biological one that many of us have come to believe. I was like, wow, this is so deep. And so I wonder, do you think society can really get past this quote unquote biological process we have utilized since the dawn of time? Is it just a matter of society learning to embrace empathy?
I think we stand on the threshold, you know, of an extraordinary new world that we're building, and it could be a utopia or a dystopia. I think we're really standing at the gates of it right now. I think that unless we start to realize that actually human overpopulation is part of the problem, and that overvaluing motherhood is part of that problem, that undervaluing women as individuals and only seeing them as ways to, as you say, to create boy childs and things like that, you know, this is part of this massive moment. And I don't know, it depends how much sleep I've had as to how optimistic I feel about it, to be honest. But these, you know, pronatalism and the idea that we just have to keep producing more and more children comes from much older tribal times. You know, when we had much higher infant mortality, when your children had to be there to take care of you when you were old, your children were your wealth.
Right.
And, you know, so much of our kind of our tribal, and that led into our social understanding of what it means to be human, you know, is based around this overvaluing of motherhood as the only way to be a human being. But yet, what's interesting is there have always been childless people, there have always been childless women, you know, and men, and we have so much other stuff to contribute to society that we can't do if we're bringing up children. It's like, not only is it a shame to overvalue motherhood, but by undervaluing childless women, we also undervalue the many other ways there are to contribute love to this world and to each other and to society. You know, it's we each have a role to play, and you know, having children is just one way to do it. It's not the best way. It's not the only way. Right.
It's just, I think it's for many women though, it's a power way. That's their power. Is
in a sexist society, in a pronatalist and sexist society, it is the fastest way to get status. You only have to look at often for underprivileged young women, perhaps, without access to education, without access to maybe career advancement and jobs, fastest way to get status in the community is to have a kid.
Right. And so that's when, as I was doing some research for my next episode, they say women aged 15 to 44 who have problems. I have such a problem with them calling a 15-year-old a woman who's having trouble getting pregnant. It just drives me nuts when I see, when I read the research, they always use that window of time for women.
They do it in the US, actually. I don't see that so much in the UK, but the US, like the UK, has seen a massive program of reduction in teenage pregnancies. I mean, they're so much less than they used to be, which is also one of the reasons why when people say, why don't you just adopt, there's also, it's like, join the dots, people.
Right.
Actually, teenagers having babies out of wedlock and giving them up for adoption is not nearly as prevalent as it used to be. So actually, the children that are often available for adoption are children that need very, very specialized and dedicated adoptive parents. And not everyone is up for that. No. And I think if you've been through a long fertility journey, I mean, Lisa Manterfield of Life Without Baby has a brilliant quote on, why she and her husband didn't adopt. And it was like, we maxed out the heartbreak cards already.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's, I'm hoping somebody gets to hear that, because you're right. We're not all set up, whether or not we've maxed out that heartbreak card to be able to take care of a child that needs special care. We're just not. And
it's
I
really
won't take that
important
guilty
for those children.
On. Right.
Yeah, it's really important for those children that we are.
Right.
They need us. No,
right.
They're not just booby prizes for someone who couldn't have a baby. These are human beings who've had a really tough time and deserve the very best care they can get.
Exactly. So yeah, we will not be taking that guilt on for not adopting a child that has special needs.
Not unless they want to take it on.
Right.
Because actually, why didn't you adopt?
Right. I mean, good question, So as we wrap things up here, I'm trying to be cognizant of time, but there was so much. Oh my gosh. But another thing that hit me was when you said I kind of mentioned this before, grief is a dialogue, not a monologue.
Totally.
And you say, just as one of the most painful romantic experiences is unrequited love, I think that disenfranchised grief is a form of unrequited grief. A grief that is not allowed to be expressed, not allowed to be in a relationship. But grief cannot move into its active state of grieving without a relationship, because grief is a dialogue, not a monologue. And I think you continue to say, and until we find a place to have that dialogue, either face-to-face, online, or with a skilled therapist, it stays wedged in our hearts like a splinter. Oh my gosh, the way you use words. And it festers as it waits, infecting our life and our soul with sadness.
Yeah.
Oh, I sat there and I was like, oh my gosh.
I kind of got goosebumps hearing my words, hearing my words in your voice, because, I meet so many women who have been suffering silently with grief for years and feel inadequate that they have been unable to, quote unquote, move on. Mm-hmm. And I say to them, if it were possible to do this on your own, in your head, in your room, you would have done it by now. Mm-hmm. This is, grief is a part of love, because only love creates grief. And when I realized that, it also made me realize I loved my children. I just didn't meet them. But I would not be grieving if I had not loved them. And it kind of also gave me permission to love them. And because I don't know if you or your listeners have ever been in a situation, maybe as young people, of, being in a relationship and the relationship doesn't work out and you expect to be really upset. And everyone says, how are you doing? And you're like, oh, actually, I'm kind of fine. and you realize that actually, you talked yourself into the idea that you were in love, but actually you weren't.
Right.
Because
you're in love
actually,
with love.
Yeah, you're kind of fine when it's over and it's like, well, it's not such a big deal. And then, that is so different to, but when you break up, because heartbreak is a form of grief. When you break up with someone that you love, it's like, it's a devastating experience, and it changes you forever. And this is something else I talk about grief. I said, there is no getting over this. There is no going back to the old you, because grief is a form of love, and love changes us. Whether a relationship works out or it doesn't, you can never go back to the person you were before you loved that person. You have been changed by love, and grief changes us too. It burns away whatever's not needed for the kind of onward journey. I mean, I'm a different version of myself because of going through this grieving process. I'm a lot fiercer in some ways, Civilla, but I'm also just so much more tender.
Yes, it takes away this type of grief, whether it's the grief of love, loss of love, the loss of the not meeting the children that you love, because I never even thought of it that way. But of course, if you didn't love them, you wouldn't miss them. So of course you were in love with them. But it does make you less judgmental of the world around you.
Oh, goodness. Because everyone is carrying such a broken heart somewhere.
Right.
Everyone.
And that opens your eyes more now than, say, for me at least, in my 20s, when I thought, all is well, everything's cool, I'm going to live forever and nothing's going to touch me, no one's going to break my heart, etc. And then
I'm a nice person. I floss my teeth. I pay my taxes. Everything's going to go fine for me. And it's like,
exactly.
Oh, and then not only do bad things happen to good people, but great things happen to shit people. And then you're like, how does this work?
Yeah, this is not working out the way life is. It's not fair.
Yeah, it's not fair. Yeah. And actually, for me, I think really digesting that it's not fair was a hugely important part of my grief. Oh, yeah. And that's also part, as you say, of us opening our eyes, because do you know what? Actually, it's not fair for anyone. It's like life is fundamentally unfair, and everyone is pained. I mean, one of my quotes, it's attributed to Plato, the ancient Greek philosopher, is be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle.
Yes.
Yes. And that's what this has opened my eyes to.
So that's what the point I guess I was making, and you've made it, was that that's why community is so important.
So important.
To help us get through. So you've got a great, huge community, and all of us on the platform have communities in some way, shape, or form, because we realize and recognize how important community is, to have that dialogue with people who understand.
And to give back, because I was helped, by others. Finding others to talk to and talk with, and, share this through. And I know how important it is to be there for others. I mean, I was part of a 12-step group called Al-Anon, which is for friends and families of alcoholics and addicts, after my marriage broke down, because my ex-husband, one of the big implications, the reason our marriage broke down, was that he became an alcoholic and addict. And so along with my infertility, you can imagine it was a real mess. And,
I can't even imagine.
And, that was when I really experienced the power of peer-to-peer healing. That we don't need to be experts. We just need to be there for each other. We need to listen. We need to create a safe space where people can share their stories and, that are confidential. And that had a huge impact on when I started Gateway Women, because I thought, I'm still grieving. I don't have any wisdom. But I thought, okay, well, maybe if I can set up something that's safe, that's confidential, where, there's a structure about what we're going to talk about. That was like my very first in-person groups were like that. Let's just see if it's possible. And the magic happened, which is that, when we opened our hearts to each other, and when we listened to each other, when we gave each other the gift of our full attention, the healing happened.
So that's why I'm sure, that's why I'm so happy that you're in the space. I didn't even know about you being in the space when I started 4 years ago, unfortunately for me. But just so happy that you're in the space. And I know there's so many women who are also happy and have learned so much, because, as I said, the women in my group who are just talking about the book have said how it's helped them immensely come to terms. So there is so much more. As we wrap things up here, I wanted to say that, thank you for schooling me on the term double whammy because I just used it so nonchalantly when I say I didn't get the husband, I didn't get the kids, so I got the double whammy, and I never thought of it as being possibly patriarchal until I read the book. So I learned a lesson. I'm trying to come up with another term, and because I definitely don't want to be pitied, and I don't think any of us wants pity. We don't, and as I always say, we want empathy, not sympathy.
Yeah.
And so just, that was a great point that you made in the book. I also really, really, really loved the part where you talked about the women who, as childless, not by choice women, how we're not taken seriously. And I read about the woman who was forced from her own bedroom to sleep in a tent in the garden to make room for her young niece in her bedroom. I was like, are you kidding me? I couldn't believe it. I had to reread it to make sure I didn't miss a word.
And I hear it every Christmas. I mean, it happens all the time. It is quite extraordinary. And then when these kind of otherings happen, if the childless woman sort of protests, she's told she's being oversensitive. And it's like,
oh my gosh,
there's like no awareness of like how incredibly, insulting and abusive and devaluing is. It's like, you don't even deserve a bed anymore. It's just like, what?
And depending on where she is in her journey, she can really believe them.
Yes.
Or she can have that conversation with them that you suggest way before the event to make sure that they understand that, hey, this is how things are going to be. And I talk about that a lot on my platform, the kind but firm boundaries that we need to set up and maintain, because that was ridiculous. I was like, am I reading this correctly? And so, but I think this is where that term tone deaf comes in with our very own family members, because I've not had to deal with that, but I think as childless, not by choice women, we've all had to deal with it on some level where maybe we're not listened to when it comes to making suggestions, or just being talked to in a certain way at a family gathering,
or being completely left out of important family decisions. And then when you kind of protest about that, we're like, a kind of look of bafflement.
Right.
Well,
like, what?
Of course we didn't discuss, selling the family home or giving away all of this or sorting out the will or thinking, it's fine. Everything gets ignored until it comes to kind of, care for the elderly. And suddenly it's like, we're the first in line for the conversation.
Right. And not that we don't want to, but I mean, in fact, I am the one caring for my parents.
Yeah.
And
this is very, very common.
Yeah. Very common in our demographic to be the ones caring for our parents. And I love my parents. They celebrated their 53rd wedding anniversary yesterday. Yeah. I do whatever I have to do for them. And that includes fighting with doctors and just, just battling it out and being the bad guy, because that's my role. But, everybody else is out there. They are doing what they want to do. And they don't look and think, well, wait a minute, this is day in and day out for me.
But also what is not happening in your life because of the time and energy. And, this is a time of your life when, you need to be earning money and making savings, for your old age that you're not doing because you're privileging your time for your parents. It's like there is a cost for us later in life for not spending this time basically looking out for ourselves. I mean, that's why I'm one of the founding members at AWOC, which your listeners might want to have a look at. That's awoc.org, which is Aging Without Children, which is an organization in the UK that I was a founding member of 4 years ago. And we are the only organization in the world talking and campaigning about the issue of aging without children. And it's really important.
Yeah, I put that link in the show notes because I did come across that. And I came across it with Dr. Robin, actually.
Yeah.
Because I interviewed him a few months ago. So on
he's an absolute honey, isn't he?
I love him. I love him. He's just that interview was absolutely awesome, and I'll put that link in the show notes as well. But childlessness from a man's point of view it was an awesome interview. So that's how I came across that. So it's definitely going to be in the show notes.
Good.
But
Excellent.
I just wanted to, no problem. And I wanted to ask you before, because look, I can go on. I mean, the spinster stereotype, the doting aunt stereotype, the older childless woman being a witch or a Cruella de Vil stereotype, and I can go on. So I'm going to cut it off here and just ask the listeners to please read the book. It's awesome. It's worth the read. And so I just want to ask you if you have any final words before we wrap things up here, Jody.
I do. I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to reach out to me and for introducing me to your audience. And I will leave you with one thought about stereotypes, which is I think there's a holiday we can claim. I reckon we should claim Halloween, because if they want us to be childless witches, let's rock it. Let's do it.
Okay. You hear that, everybody?
Let's take over Halloween.
Oh my goodness, I love it. Well, thank you so very much for your time today, Jody. It was such a pleasure and such an honor to be able to speak with you. And I know that the listeners will get great comfort from what you're doing and all the work you're doing. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
And thank you for your service to the childless community as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.